out the red carpet here. Welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I am here with, and yes, I had to write all this down, with astrophysicist and assistant professor at the University of Arizona and Stewart Observatory, who is also a TED Fellow, and also a recipient of the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers. Erika Hamden, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Woo. I mean, there is so much more on your bio on your website, and I was like, I don't know. I mean, it's only a half an hour show.
Yeah, it's not as interesting as some of the other things we can talk about.
Okay, well, let's jump into it here. And I thought this would be pretty interesting. So, do you remember how old you were when you kind of first became enamored with the night sky?
Yeah, so I was like 7. I think I was in second grade because I learned how to read in first grade. And my mom mentioned something on the news about scientists wanted to come up with a new name for the Big Bang, and they were running a contest. Like you could submit your own name because it is like an objectively bad name for the beginning of the universe. And I was like 7, and I was like, "What's the Big Bang? I don't know what that is." And she was like, "Oh, go look it up." And because it was the
Oh, go
80s,
look it up.
yeah, she was like making dinner, and it was the 80s, so I
Oh,
went to our
yeah.
encyclopedia, the like physical books, and I looked it up, and I remember reading the entry and being like, "Oh, this is cool." And then I like read all this other stuff about space, and then in the set of books, the last book was an atlas, and it had a map of the solar system, and then like these were the very last pages. It was like a map of the solar system, a map of the galaxy, and then a map of the known universe. And I like can still remember sitting in the room and like looking at the map of the known universe and being like, this is the coolest thing ever. So that's how I got into space. But what's really funny is like looking at the night sky. So I grew up in New Jersey,
Mhm.
and there's all this light pollution from New York City, and like I didn't really see um the actual night sky until I was in college, and I went on an observing trip to Tucson, where I live now. I went to one of the telescopes here, and like I was just helping someone else who was doing an observing run. And I remember going outside the telescope, and I looked up, and I was like you could see the Milky Way, you could see everything. It was an incredible experience. But by then I was already so into space that like I was gonna do it anyway.
It's so funny you were talking about being a kid, and yeah, it's such a different experience to the kids now because I remember being a kid and we had it was like pre-internet, pre-streaming, pre-cell phones. So like when one of my parents was busy, and maybe this happened to you too, the favorite thing was just like, just go play outside, just
Yeah.
with your friends. And I'll be like, but it's dark. Like, you'll be fine. Just go, just climb a tree or something.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time like just like existing in my own head. And I was always trying to convince someone to drive me to like the library or a bookstore so I could like go read something. And I remember I like figured out how to use the VHS recorder,
Mm.
just so I could record shows on PBS about space and like science.
Oh, did you watch like Cosmos and things like that?
Yeah, and like there was this one series that was narrated by Tom Selleck, of all people, that was like all about space. I should look this up because like my mom really liked Tom Selleck, and she was like, "Why is he doing this?" And I was like, "I don't know." I mean, I was like
Because they
10,
paid
but
him.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I like now I think back on that, and I was like so I was trying to just like get knowledge from any place that I could. And I assume that if I was a kid now, I would just be like on the internet all the time looking stuff up.
Yeah. Well, let me piggyback on what we were just talking about and ask, so what are some of your favorite go-to constellations when you look up in the sky? We're talking about like Orion, Cassiopeia, the Big and Little Dipper. I feel like there should be a third one like Dipper adjacent, but just the two.
The Medium Dipper, the perfect
Right?
size
The whole measuring cup, set. But
teaspoon. So my all-time favorite constellation is Orion, which is like kind of that's like the standard. So I've been in Tucson for a few years, and a couple years ago I got a hot tub, and I use it every night because actually it like helps me sleep. Like I'm obsessed with sleeping, and like every night I go in the hot tub. I keep all the lights off in the house, and so my eyes get adjusted to the dark, and it's actually like a really cool experience to just be out at around the same time every night and experience like the darkness. And then it's been fantastic because I can see like over weeks you can like see things moving across the sky. And I like jokingly call it hot tub astronomy because I'll just be like in the hot tub and like
The
looking
title
out.
of your next podcast. Yeah.
Yes. And so like now I've had it for a few years. So I have like last year, I remember watching Orion go across the sky, and Mars was also visible, and you could like really see how it moved over weeks of time. And this
Wow.
year, so Orion is like now pretty high in the sky at 8:30 when I go out, and Jupiter is also up, but Jupiter, because it's so far away, it like doesn't move as much. And so that's been an interesting contrast to be like, oh, last year I felt like there's a lot more stuff happening in the sky that you could see and like track. And this year it feels like calmer. Um, so I'm always looking for Orion because it's like, oh, Orion is low but rising. That's like when Tucson is cooling off, like it's getting cooler and winter is coming. And then as like Orion starts to be way over to the west, then that also is like, oh, it's gonna get hot soon. So I'm like starting to associate where Orion is during hot tub time with like the seasons. And um I also really like looking at like Orion is also nice because you can find lots of other constellations by like using Orion, and it's so easy to find. So I always look for Aldebaran, which is if you like follow the three stars of the belt to the right,
Mhm.
there's like a bright red star that's part of the constellation of Taurus. And so it's like the red eye of the bull of Taurus. And I really like that. And then if you keep going, you hit the Pleiades. So I like always like to look for them. And I really like Castor and Pollux. Recently, I guess like earlier in the year, I was trying to find at certain times of the year, I was convinced that I could see Andromeda, like the galaxy from the hot tub, because Tucson is actually a very dark
What were
place.
you drinking in the hot tub?
But I was like, I think there's a smudge in the same place every night. And I
Okay.
think that, and I would always be like, I need to go look where Andromeda is in the constellation. And then I would forget. And then I would be in the hot tub the next night and then be like,
You're like,
I think that's a galaxy.
yeah.
So yeah, it's been like I didn't expect that I would like the hot tub as much as I did. I didn't think it would help me sleep as much. And the kind of reconnection to the night sky was a really nice bonus.
I mean, everybody wins. So
Yeah.
this I've been dying to ask you because I don't know if I've had, at least they haven't divulged this information to me about doing a TED Talk, but definitely not someone who Wired magazine called their 2019 TED Talk a highlight. So I've got to put you on the hot seat for that and say, well, how does one prepare a TED Talk? I mean, it's not like you're giving a toast at a wedding reception or something. This is a big deal. It's going to be filmed, huge
Yeah.
room. Everyone's got their cell phone out. So you have to have all your ducks in a row, as it were. So is that something where they approach, like that committee approaches you, or how does that come about?
So I had applied to be a TED Fellow, which is like a program that they do for sort of like not necessarily younger people, but just like people who are kind of doing a little things that are a little more out there and not like the usual TED Talk
A
like
little out there.
content. Yeah, out there, literally, figuratively. Um, and so when I had applied, I was like, oh, I have this project that I'm working on, which is really interesting and weird, and I want to talk about it. And I sort of had thought like the project will be a huge success, and then I'll be like, here's all the things we discovered about galaxies. And then when the time came to actually like, then I was selected. And then when the time came to like start writing the talk, that's not how the project had turned out. So I had to be like, okay, now what am I going to talk about? And there was like a couple of people that I worked with who were part of the TED like organization. And so they helped with like brainstorming. And I mean, they were like kind of tough actually. Like I've never been as a scientist, you're not like super evaluated on your writing or like ability to tell a story. And
Yeah.
so they were like, they really pushed me on like, why should anyone care about this? Like, why is this interesting? Like, what's the narrative kind of arc?
What's the hook? Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, don't make it hokey or like, making sure that it's not, like there's a lot of preconceptions of like the TED Talk style, and they were also just like, well, it can't just be like, here's the big lesson. It has to be like organic and whatever.
Slideshow. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they helped a lot, and it was and I just went through like a lot of drafts of it, and then they want you to memorize it, and then I practiced it a bunch, and then even it's also the closest I've come to like I don't know, on like TV they sometimes show like actors that are having like meltdowns, and you know, in like the narrative whatever of the show, and I'm thinking of like 30 Rock, and like Jenna, one of the characters, and she's always like locking herself in her dressing room.
Oh yeah.
And the days before, that was like the closest I've ever felt to experiencing that, because I like did a practice run, and then they were like, oh, we think the ending is still bad. And I was like, you're telling me this now, like the
Oh my
day before?
God.
Like, I was like,
Panic
but
attack. Yeah.
they were right also. And so the changes that I made, especially like in the last couple of days, I think made it a lot better. And it's weird because like I'm telling this story of my own experience, and I lived it. So I get it every time I tell it, but the different ways are better to like communicate it to someone who is not me.
Mhm.
Um, so it was a really intense experience. And then doing the talk, you know, I was like really nervous. And then afterwards, I like I'm like very good at following instructions. So they were like, okay, you like give the talk, then you like count to 3, and then you'll turn around and exit. So then that's what I did, because that's what they told me to do. But like the audience was giving a standing ovation, but I was like, well, they told me to count to 3 and then leave,
You
so I'm
were
gonna
like,
leave like
see ya.
that.
They're like,
Um,
what is she? She
yeah,
hates
like
us. What happened? Oh, she's so mean.
so it was like definitely a very intense experience, but it was really fun, and I met a lot of incredible people.
Awesome, awesome. So I want to dovetail from that into something that is coming up here in April. We have the solar eclipse on April 8th. And I wanted to let people know this because I don't think a lot of people know until I did some research. And the next total solar eclipse seen from the contiguous United States won't be again seen from here until August 23rd of 2044.
Yeah,
So if you're going to watch it, folks, don't be near traffic, but
yeah,
stop what you're doing and try to appreciate it because
yeah.
a long 20
It'll be
years is a
20
long
years.
time.
Yeah. And I think that, so I've seen 2 total solar eclipses in my life, and I would say that they are by far like the coolest thing that I've ever experienced. I like rank a top 3 things in my life. And number 3 was watching a space shuttle launch.
Oh, you got to go to Florida and see it in person?
Yeah, which was incredible. And then number 2 was seeing the Aurora Borealis in Norway.
Oh,
And
wow.
number 1 is like a total solar eclipse. Like it's so otherworldly, and just
I mean,
like
you
if
can see why like ancient civilizations thought that the
freaked
world was
out.
ending is like the heat and the light that we depend on for everything looks
Yeah,
like it's being eaten.
yeah,
You're like, and you look
yeah.
at some of the
Like
things like with the Mayans and the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans, and like there was a big deal.
like if you were a medieval peasant, if I was a medieval peasant, I would absolutely be like, we got to kill the king right now. Like
You know what? He's just not working out.
not
The
working.
taxes were one thing, like having 4 square feet to grow crops or whatever is bad enough, but
But
something is
the
eating the sun.
sun,
We need that. You
yeah,
don't need the crown as much as we need that thing in the sky.
yeah. And it's like such a cool, I think it's such a cool reminder of just the like space that we live in, and even the like physical experience of it, like the the horizon in all directions looks like a sunset, like it's
Mhm.
like red and glowing, and then you can see stars close to where the sun is because the light is blocked. So sometimes you can see like Mercury and Venus because those are the planets that are close to the sun. The animals all act weird depending on where you are. If you're at like a high point, you can actually see the shadow come towards you, which is very cool and like disaster movie-esque.
Yeah, very much like a horror movie. You're like, oh, I knew it would
Yeah,
end like this.
like it's coming for you. And it's just so incredible. And I think I think a lot of people have seen partial solar eclipses because those are cover a much wider
Right.
geographic area. So you can just see it from your house and you're like, oh, this is cool. But it doesn't, like the output of the sun is so bright that you don't really notice it until even like only 20% of the sun is visible. And even then, the difference between like 98% or 99% coverage and 100% is so stark. So I think people think like, oh, it's just going to be kind of like the partial eclipse that I've already seen, but no, it's like it's a whole other incredible experience.
Are you at the university doing anything special that day to commemorate or to experience or record it?
So there's like a really wonderful planetarium and science center at the University of Arizona that's called the Flandreau
Mhm.
Planetarium, and they're doing some on-campus events on the day, and giving out like eclipse classes and um but in Tucson it won't be 100% covered. So I'm driving to Texas to watch it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go to like San Antonio, since I think I I had figured that Texas had one of the better chances of being clear
Hmm.
on in like early April. Like the eclipse will go through Mexico, Texas, like the Midwest, up through Toronto. Interestingly, Toronto is like only is 99% covered. You have to go just a little bit west of Toronto for 100%.
Are they all going, come on?
Yeah, I know. What the hell? Um, but but like I think I felt like Texas is unlikely to be cloudy or rainy or whatever, whereas like upstate New York, it's like, oh, I don't know. I think that's a little
That's a
too
little bit of a
risky.
drive.
Yeah. Yeah, and Texas is like almost the closest place that you could just drive to from Tucson. So I was asked to like do some stuff at the university and also in Phoenix, where there's like also a wonderful science center. And I had to tell both of them like, no, I'm gonna be going to
You're
experience
like,
it myself.
sorry, not
Sorry.
sorry. So I have to just show you this because I made my list of questions and then I went back and did some research and then so I had to do like this sports thing where you're doing the playbook and drawing like arrows and circling and underlining. So after that I come all the way down and it just says telescopes. So tell me about Fireball because when I looked into that and I'm going, wait a minute. It's a telescope, but it's on a balloon. Like,
Yes.
what Monty Python sorcery is this? Because so
I know.
explain that to
It,
me.
it's totally like it is objectively a foolish thing to do, is generally how I feel about it. But so at a very like basic level, um, sometimes you are looking at objects or wavelengths of light, and you can just build your telescope on the ground, like the ones that are at the top of mountains around
Mhm.
Tucson. Those are mostly visible wavelengths because it's all the visible light from the sun and from everything like is transmitted through the atmosphere, but the atmosphere blocks a bunch of other wavelengths. So it blocks like gamma rays and X-rays, which is great for life on Earth,
Mhm.
because those are really bad for you. And it blocks most ultraviolet light, which is the wavelength of light that I do most of my research in. And that's good because the ultraviolet is what gives you a sunburn. It like penetrates. X-rays can like go all the way through and are very energetic and damaging. UV light um, generally gets absorbed in the skin, and the depending on what wavelength it is like is absorbed at different layers in your skin, but that's like the predominant cause of skin cancer is basically exposure to UV photons. So in order to observe the universe in the ultraviolet, you have to be above most of the atmosphere. So a lot of ultraviolet telescopes are in space, like orbiting telescopes. The Hubble Space Telescope, for example, has a bunch of UV channels where it can like take images in the UV or do spectroscopy. But then there's also this weird in between where you can put your telescope on a balloon that's above most of the atmosphere. It's like up in the stratosphere, but it's you do it because it's like cheaper, and the type of science that we're trying to do is a little riskier. And so NASA won't necessarily be like, here's a bunch of money for a space telescope. They want you to like kind of prove it first with this smaller format. But then you take a really, really, really expensive set of mirrors, like hang it on this giant balloon and then throw it up into the stratosphere. And then later it comes down and crashes somewhere. And like, the balloons, as I learned, unfortunately, can be sometimes they have holes in them. And like you spend all this time putting it together and then it doesn't actually go as high as we need it to go. But the general idea for Fireball is to look at galaxies that are sort of at an intermediate distance. So like a new telescope like JWST, that's looking at galaxies that are like right at the beginning of the universe. They're like there's you can call them super old, but like the time that we're viewing them is actually when they're really new. They're like only a couple 100 million years old. Whereas if you look at like the Andromeda galaxy, it's as old as the universe. And
Right.
so like some observations will look at nearby galaxies, some observations will look at these really distant galaxies, and then Fireball we're kind of looking like in between um galaxies that are a couple billion years old. They're not as old as like our Milky Way, but they're much older than the ones that JWST looks at. So we're trying to understand how the galaxy interacts with its environment. The galaxy like exists in this dark matter halo, and but it also like stuff spews out of the galaxy when stars explode. Things come into the galaxy from farther out in space, and it's this like really dynamic environment. And so that's what Fireball is trying to observe. And the balloon, the hardest part of it isn't the telescope, it's actually the control system. Because
Mm.
like the balloon is really big, and there's like a cord, and the telescope hangs from the cord, so it's a pendulum. So you have to like be able to point the telescope and then keep it steady on a object while we're taking images. And so the pointing system is actually an incredibly sophisticated um, part of the telescope.
I'm so glad that you explained it so eloquently because I feel like if I, not having your background, if I had to go into some kind of boardroom situation or apply online or present something to for a grant or whatever, I just imagine the pandemonium and horror of what would I do? I would have to go in with like Legos and like balloons from like the store and duct tape and like MacGyver or something and just be a complete freaking mess and just be like, well, and and I know I would say things that you never want to hear when you're trying to get money from an organization, like the death phrase of like, well, in theory, and
You
you're
know,
just putting the thing together and you're blowing up the balloon and the Legos are dropping everywhere and they're just like, fine, as long as it's under 5 million, whatever you need, whatever. We gave 20 to James Cameron. We have to give you five.
yeah. I mean, what's funny is like a lot of the proposals, you're really being like, in theory, this is gonna work. Like, we promise. And then they're like, okay, let's see. And then sometimes it's like, well,
You have to
did
use
I?
like in theory or like allegedly.
Yeah. But that's what science is all about. In
Oh yeah,
theory, it work.
the hypothesis. Okay, so let me ask you about space travel because we are allegedly getting ready to land on the moon again and go
Yeah.
farther. In fact, I don't remember. I think didn't did the ship the rocket that a few years ago that I think SpaceX didn't attach his car, his Tesla, to
Yes,
the
there's a
rocket
car.
because
Yeah.
now did that go to Mars or that just go somewhere out in space where it will eventually come back around to his ego? I don't know, but
So I'm applying my like extremely critical helmet now for that that car. It was a Tesla. Um so they were testing out a heavy lift rocket,
uh-huh.
which is so like the most famous heavy lift rocket is the Saturn V, and basically it's a huge rocket. The bigger the rocket, the more material you can get into space. Rockets are tricky because like the bigger the rocket, the harder it is to lift up. So you're like wasting a ton of the fuel just to like get the other fuel up. And so it becomes there's like in engineering, it's like the rocket equation is like how like if you are trying to move like a teeny amount of mass, you actually need like a rocket this big. Um, and so this heavy lift rocket and like part of the demonstration was like, oh, the payload is going to be this Tesla that will send to Mars. And then after it happened, they were like, oh, actually, we sent the payload, like it went even farther, it went to the asteroid belt. And like I think when they were talking about sending it to Mars, that's like it's just going to the orbit of Mars, but it's not actually in orbit around Mars. Like they weren't, it's incredibly hard to put something in orbit around a planet. Like even just like getting it close to the planet is hard. It involves a lot of like precise timing and calculations. And the fact that they were like, oh, it's going to go to the orbit of Mars, and then it went to a completely different, farther away place tells me like, oh, they didn't calculate anything. They were just like, let's see what happens. And
Let's just throw some money at it and see
yeah.
what happens.
And
Uh,
so it is in orbit around the sun, like somewhere between the orbit of Mars and the asteroid belt. But also like space is a super harsh, unpleasant environment. And so I'd have to check if this has already happened, but like the paint and all the plastic components and like literally every part of the car is continuously getting hit with like charged particles from the sun. That's called the
mhm.
solar wind. And so in it only takes like a few years for it basically to be like it'll be completely like stripped of everything that isn't just straight metal, and then eventually that will also just get disintegrated.
Crazy.
So
So
there's
let's say with stepping stones. So it sounds like we're going to go back to the moon, establish some kind of long-term colony there, maybe start, tourist trips if that's what Musk is talking about with grain silo sized ships going back and forth. I mean, I guess that's the talk, and then eventually to Mars. But beyond Mars, do you think something kind of like Europa with them already? It already has, frozen water there. I mean, if you read 2061 by Arthur C. Clarke, that there are probably angry algae that would come up and attack the ships. I don't know.
um I think so it's really tricky. Like getting like so the trip to Mars even is really problematic because the solar wind and like coronal mass ejections, just like the sun itself, is actually creates this really harsh environment when you're between the Earth and Mars. If you're just going to the moon, you're actually still mostly within Earth's magnetic field, and so you're protected from a lot of the activity of the sun. But if you're going outside of that like protective bubble, then you have to do a lot of shielding, like radiation shielding, basically, of the spacecraft in order to get farther away. So that's also a concern going to a place like Europa. The other issue actually with Europa is like Jupiter is has this incredibly strong radiation field. It's an issue when we send missions to Jupiter and the outer solar system planets in general. But Jupiter is like has a very intense radiation environment, so all the equipment has to be able to withstand that. So if you're sending people there, people are even more fragile. And so that kind of like radiation consideration hasn't really happened yet in any of the designs of anything or when people are talking about it. And so for me, it'll feel like it's more of a realistic possibility when that part starts to be accounted for. The other issue is actually like once you're on Mars, Mars doesn't have a magnetic field, and so you still have to be protected for all the people that are like on there. There's a very thin atmosphere, which can help a little bit, but not a ton, to block a lot of the damaging particles that the Earth's magnetic field blocks. And those particles are what create the aurora at the poles. The north and south magnetic pole are places where those particles they get like funneled down. And the interactions are really pretty, but there's like a lot of energy. And if your, fragile human body is exposed to that, it's like not good for you. I think that I would love to go to space. Space is awesome and I would like to be there.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, the thing
Um,
is, and I want to ask you this too because um, I, I'm trying to remember when I saw this documentary. I don't even think you can find that on YouTube, but I think they interviewed some of the surviving Apollo mission astronauts, and they were saying, when do you think we'll be on Mars? And I remember, I can't remember who it was. Mattingly, maybe somebody like late Apollo, like 71,
mhm.
72, and they were so pissed that the funding got cut
Yeah,
because those guys and everybody working on the program at that time, they thought that, the space shuttle program coming in really cut them off at the knees in terms of they thought they could be on Mars by the 80s. I
yeah.
mean, that was the thinking then. I mean, maybe it wasn't realistic at that time, but to know that we landed on the moon with basically something with the computing power of like a pocket calculator.
Less than a cell phone. Like your cell phone has more computing power than the entire Apollo program. Like, everything on the ground, everything in space, like nuts.
I mean, do you think that, I mean, it's impossible to really know for sure to look back at that time and think that with the cuts and everything and the different administrations that were going on at the time, that it was a concerted effort to just, with the space shuttle program, just keep everything localized, Earth orbit, not go back to the moon, not because I guess it's one of those things like we needed the competition. Like as a country, it's like, well, without Russia, it was like, oh, well, we went there, we planted a flag, we played some golf. Um, what more, what reason to go? Like I know
Yeah.
it's like they didn't find any precious metals or anything to mine, so it was like, well, why go back to this rock? We have plenty of rocks in the
Yeah.
desert. I mean, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. A lot of the stuff that I just mentioned about like radiation or even like the time it takes to get in between places, like those are all just technical issues, but they can be solved. Like you can solve the radiation problem. You just have to like be creative and think about it. Um, and it's mostly a question of like will and money. And the Apollo missions, like when Apollo was at its peak, it was actually like 5% of the federal budget was going to NASA. Right now, NASA gets like 0.5%, maybe a little less than that. So it's like much, much, much less. And the space shuttle program, you can like see the NASA funding and Apollo it ends. The space shuttle program was cheaper than Apollo. And so like that's part of why. I think for me, I feel like it's worth going because you don't know what you're going to find and you don't know what the benefits are going to be
Mhm.
um, of sending people to these different places. Like robots are really good, but they can't do everything that a person can do. People are fragile, but more creative. And I think what it's going to take is maybe some sense of competition again, but I actually think that finding life somewhere um, is going to motivate people to be like, oh, we actually shouldn't just like stay on our one little very lovely planet. It is really a
Well,
great
it's
place.
like Carl Sagan said, if there's nothing out there, it's a horrible waste of space. I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah. And I
I don't know
think
if
that,
you've seen the movie or read the book Contact, that maybe it would have to be that way, where we couldn't really contemplate what we're looking at or feeling, or maybe our first contact is going to be some kind of bacteria or sea algae that we don't think it's sentient, we don't think we can have a conversation with it, but
yeah.
yeah, it might not be
Um,
like the Star Trek movie where we launch Voyager and it comes back and it's this giant
Future.
thing that's taken
Yeah.
off, like, a huge thing that, is coming home. But
Yeah. I mean, I think the like people just sort of lost interest and they didn't feel like there was a strong motivation. And I think now a lot of the motivation like that Elon Musk, for example, gives is like, oh, we need another planet because like we're ruining this planet. And partly that's like, well, we should probably just take care of the one that we have because Mars is not like you can't actually terraform Mars again because of its lack of magnetic field. Like, the
oh,
other
they'll
planets.
try, 100 years from now they'll try.
Yeah. But
There'll be a Starbucks on the moon at some point,
I mean, I would go.
or at least a Starbucks coffee maker.
But I think actually one thing that could be really revolutionary is if there was different propulsion methods and or we discover more about the nature of space-time. Because I think one of the limiting factors is like we could probably get people to Europa with enough effort and enough money, but then like do you really want to send people who have to live under the ice sheet in this liquid ocean with maybe hostile algae? We don't know. I assume they're actually hostile octopuses. That's what in my head, that's what's in the liquid ocean of Europa.
Hostile octopi,
Yeah,
yes.
that are like, why are you here? But I think if there was a easier way to get farther, like, because we know that there's planets all over the galaxy, like almost like so many stars have planets, there's probably a lot of planets that are like the Earth. And so if instead we had a better understanding of like the nature of space-time or of like how to move faster through space, like that would give a better motivation because then you could be like, oh, like you could get here in a human lifetime. You could like go to this other planet and see what it's like. And I think I think part of our like slowness to really build on the achievements of Apollo and is just like we know that okay, you get to Mars, you get to Europa. We know that those aren't perfect places for us, but there is a
Mhm.
perfect place somewhere way far away. And maybe if it was easier to get there, we would be more motivated to do that.
Excellent. Well, as this is a somewhat silly show, I feel like I should ask you some somewhat silly questions,
Yes,
which
please.
brace yourself. Okay, so as you are a doctor, have you and I'm sure in your profession you've traveled, having gone to conventions and things like that, and you've had to be introduced to people in tightly tight corridors and things like that, and do what I call glad handing. Have you encountered a situation where you've been with just 15 people, and then you're just literally turning around and you're going, doctor, 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 doctor. Oh, hello, doctor. It's been so long, doctor, 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 doctor. Yes, yes, doctor, doctor. Not now, doctor, doctor. Oh, hi, doctor. And then literally turn to the person next to you and go, help me. I don't know who any of these people are. Has that happened? Please tell me
So
that's happened in some capacity.
So actually what's funny is like my dad is a physics professor and he's also a doctor and then one of my cousins is a dentist and so we like joke about having a doctor's Hamden club and
That
so
is awesome.
and my cousin got married last weekend so that's why I'm thinking of it. But when I saw him I was like, "Oh, doctor." And
Yes, it's the little things. Have you been somewhere, let's just say a karaoke bar, and you're with coworkers or someone drunkenly does a rendition of Bad Case of Loving You by Robert Palmer, which is a serenade to a doctor. Have you heard that? Has anyone ever done that?
no one has ever done
Have you
that.
heard the song?
No, I don't think so.
Oh my God, you're gonna make me do it. Okay, so how does the chorus go?
I have to right now.
Doctor, doctor, give me the news. I've got a bad case of loving you.
Oh,
No cure is gonna kill my ill. I got a bad case of loving you. God, I think I forgot some of the words, but anyway, rest in peace, Robert Palmer. But there you go. So now
now it's happened.
that box. People believe I freaking did that. Anyway, so wrapping up here, we've got to end it after that. What's
We can't
coming
stop
up
it.
next for you, and where can people find your work or contact you online?
So what's coming up next? Some of my projects are in like one of them is a little space telescope that we're building at the University of Arizona, and we're getting all of our optics in, and so we're going to start putting it together, and then hopefully it will launch next year in 2025. So that's something that I'm excited about. I'm really excited about the eclipse coming. I'm like, I can't wait. And um,
Are you going to do this, or are you actually going to have the glasses?
oh
I think
no, I'm
this is
having the
more
class.
fun. This is horrible, and it's going to damage your eyes, but this is just more fun. Are you going to
Yeah,
have the
so
big, like thick glass piece like this?
I have to do a PSA now, which is like, do not look at the sun at any fraction coverage except for 100% without eye protection. And the welder's glass, like
Yeah.
there's varying levels of like darkness of the glass. And so it's actually like very unreliable because you might accidentally have something which does not protect your eyes and your eyes are really valuable. And I like really want you to keep them safe. So get Eclipse glasses. You can order them online now and they'll come in plenty of time. There's like an ISO specification. So don't order them from Amazon, get them from like a science center or like a reputable website. But don't damage your eyes. Don't look at the sun. Your brain, if you look at the sun like right now when there isn't an eclipse, your brain is like, this is too bright and it will like, you will look away. It's like a reflex.
Oh yeah.
But when the sun is at like 90% or 95%, it's still bright enough to damage your eyes, but it's not bright enough to trigger the reflex. And so you can look at it and severely damage your eyes. And I don't want that for you. I want you to lead a
No,
happy
and
life.
listen to Erika, everyone. She is a doctor. So,
So if
and
people want to find me, I'm on Instagram and I have a little science TV show that's on Arizona Public Media called New Frontiers. We have like 4 episodes a year. Actually, one is coming out in a couple of weeks, like
oh,
in March.
cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you
But yeah,
so
you
much
can
for
find
being
me on
on the show.
Instagram,
Oh,
TikTok.
it's Erika Hamden, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to check out her clips that she has on Instagram. They're delightful and they're so fun. And look like you're having the time of your life. I mean, when you are so enamored with what you're talking about and just smiling and just being out wherever you are in your yard, I don't know where
I'm
you are.
like
You're just
in
like,
my backyard right out there.
wow, I'm jealous. That
Just like,
looks amazing.
yeah,
Well, I have to say, thank you for being on the show. This will be up on the 21st online, and wish you nothing but the best. And we've
thank
got to
you.
get you into space.
I agree. Got to go to space, but I really appreciate being here and it's been so fun to talk to you.
No problem. Well, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Bye bye now.
Starry, starry night, paint your palette blue and gray. Look out on a summer's day, with eyes that know the darkness in my soul. Shadows on the hills, sketch the trees and the daffodils, catch the breeze and the winter chill.